Okay, so Chapter 8, we switch gears a little bit and we start talking about the Mac operating system. So this is going to be quite a bit different than what we've done so far in this class, but it's important that you know about it because when you go in the field, you're going to come across those people that are just more comfortable on a Mac and they'll work more efficiently on it. So we have to kind of know this system as well, especially if you're in the network maintenance degree program. You'll come across more Apple computers than you might think you would. So this is all about OS 10, right? X is the Roman numeral for 10, so we'll refer to it as OS 10. So let's talk a little bit about the history of OS 10 and the versions of the operating system. So as far as the history of Apple, a few guys, a couple of them you might have heard of before, found Apple and introduced the Apple I PC. Well, you can't really call it a PC because PC is kind of that's reserved for Microsoft stuff. In 1977, the Apple II. There was no GUI, but it had a plastic case and had a bunch of colored graphics to it. In 1983, had the first computer with a graphic operating system called the Lisa, and that was a really big deal back in the history of Apple. It was really expensive and it didn't have very many apps in it, but it had a GUI, and that was a really big deal as opposed to typing everything in command line. Then in 1984, the Macintosh 128K was introduced, so it was a little bit more affordable. In 1999, we had the first OS 10 server, and 2000 to 2001, we had the OS 10 desktop introduced. So you'll notice that it's called OS 10, but there's different versions that start with 10, which is a little weird. So just know that that is the way that they talk about those. With the different OS 10 releases, it started all the way back in March of 2001, and they're still kind of working on that same OS 10 release. Now, with each release, they have a different name. So they started out with like this animal theme, and now it's kind of changed a little bit as time has gone on. The one that we're going to focus on is El Capitan, which is the newest release. And when we work on our Macs in class, we're going to be upgrading to El Capitan. So some of those were just code names for projects. They weren't all for public release, and the book kind of highlights which is which. There's some minor stuff in there where they would patch security problems and things like that in it, but in general, this is what the OS 10 release kind of looked like. You can see they're busy making lots of updates and lots of changes. This is what the OS 10 desktop looks like. We're going to talk about all the different features on the OS 10 desktop, and it's one of the things that's great about Mac operating systems is they're extremely customizable based on what the user wants to be able to see and what's important to them. So let's talk about installing and upgrading OS 10. There's a setup assistant that runs when you first start up the computer, leads you through configuring the system. In Windows, we call this the UBI, the out-of-box experience. It makes the local user account, and they can select all the different preferences that they want, so we still have that. You need a fast internet connection. You need to back up your computer before you do any kind of installs or major changes. Check the computer model and check what version you have. If you have the right hardware, the right firmware. If you've got disk encryption enabled, you need to disable it before you start messing with files on a mass scale. Decide where you're going to install it and prepare to download from the App Store. For example, if you're going to back things up in OS 10, they have an app called Time Machine that does that for you. You definitely don't want any keys that you had for encryption being scrambled while you're doing the updating, because you might have an operating system but all your files aren't accessible. We're actually going to upgrade OS 10 to a newer version on actual MacBook Airs in this class. Yes?
Are we going to use Sierra?
Huh?
Are we using Sierra?
Using what?
Sierra.
What's Sierra?
The new one.
Yeah,
Not
the new
Sierra.
one.
What?
It has
Yeah.
Siri now.
What?
That may change my plans. We were gonna go to El Capitan, but I don't know. I'll have to check and see. It's all about what Miss Phyllis wants, because these are the ones she uses for her iOS programming class. So whatever she wants is what we will do. So here's an example of backing up your computer with Time Machine. As you can see, it's really easy. On or off, and then set the frequency of the backup, so where you're going to keep them. Time Machine is actually super duper easy. I've used it before a little bit, and compared to the Windows backup, it was really easy and really user-friendly. If you want to check for available firmware updates, you can go and look and see on each one of your computers what is available for firmware updates. Most of the time when you install OS X, you're just upgrading it. It's actually a very stable operating system. It doesn't have a lot of the problems that sometimes the Windows PCs do. Now, the problem that we have in this class, you can't virtualize OS X in Windows and just play with it. So that's why we're having to bring in the real equipment for this one, because it's only legal to run OS X on Apple computers. That's their licensing and their choice. There's no surprises generally. You have the setup assistant when you get done with the installation. And post-installation, install your apps, update any existing ones. When you see a little badge right here over the top of an icon, it means that there is an update that's available. So this is the App Store telling you you have one app that's available to be updated. You can disable that.
My books were lost, but now they are not lost.
Let's talk about navigating and managing the desktop and some of the different things we can do with it. There's a menu at the top of the desktop. It's separate from the current menu. It's got the different functions and notifications and things on it. That menu can kind of change contextually based on the app that you're in. Here's what the OS X desktop looks like. And you can see some of the things. Here's the Apple menu. We'll be using that in our labs. The menu bar, where your notifications and things pop up in the top right-hand corner, and then where you can dock your icons towards the bottom, just like we do in Windows. The Apple menu's got some different things on it. That's where you would restart, shut down the computer, find out the different hardware and software, the hardware and the firmware that's installed on the Mac. This is just like our start menu, like we would normally see. So Finder is like Windows Explorer would be. So that's where you can open a shortcut, or you can say Command-Shift-H. So Apple computers, we're used to right-clicking a lot. You can have a 2-button Mac interface, that's fine, but a lot of the commands that you'll see are going to be hold down the Command key, hold down Shift, and tap a key to do the same thing that we would do with right-clicking or a 2-key combination in Windows. But this is how you can search through the content of your Mac. Here's what that looks like, and you can see it's very similar, maybe a little prettier, but you've got all of your different locations over here, and then the different folders and files that you can click there. Here's some of the Finder menus where you can set preferences as far as what things do you want it to search. You can also customize the way that you see things in Finder. How do you want them to be ordered? How do you want the icons to look? Do you want like a big icon that's a picture? Do you want a whole lot of detail, just like we would do in Windows? You can customize the way that you see things. Here's what icon view looks like, where you get a really big, pretty icon of the app. Here's list view, where you can see very detailed information about the name and when it was modified, the type of file, and a teeny tiny little preview there of the file. In column view, the more you click through, it expands the window further so that you don't have really breadcrumbs at the top, but you can see exactly where you've been to get to those different places, which is kind of neat. That's what column view looks like. Cover flow view opens up your folders and icons, and as you scroll through, this scrolls through at the top. You can create folders. You can right-click and just say New Folder like we would do in Windows. You can go to File and New Folder if you want to see those. And here's an example of going through editing, being able to copy files, paste files and do things like that. If you want to copy, how do we copy in Windows?
Control-C.
Control-C. Well, guess what? It's Command-C. Right? It's not that far off, right? Or you can right-click and say copy. If you want to cut, you would use Command-X. We'd use Control-X in Windows. Very
Well,
similar.
It's a good thing that they're the same. How do you like them apples?
Yeah, we get Apple jokes this week. Pasting is the
Sometimes.
same with Control-V, Command-V. Deleting, you can hit Command and tap the delete key, or you can put something in the trash. They don't call it the recycle bin, they call it the trash. Something worth noting, if you drag and drop something to a different drive, you're just copying it. If you drag and drop to the same drive, you're moving it. So when you move from one spot to another on the same drive, you're kind of just changing the location the shortcut points to. When you move it to another drive, you're actually physically moving the file to another drive, which is weird because I just talked about that Security Plus this morning. And they come up on the same day. You can rename your files and folders. So click something and then pause and then click it again. If you double click, you'll just open it. But if you click and you pause and you click again, you'll be able to type in and rename that and hit enter. You can change some settings down here, the little gearbox for system preferences from the Apple menu or on the dock. If you're an iPhone user, to me, these changes are somewhat natural because you're so used to seeing the same kind of icons and things kind of work in similar ways, although you have a lot more customization on the actual computer. Here's our system preferences, or we can change a whole lot of different things and you'll be playing with those system preferences in your lab. You can change that the way they're viewed. You can either see them as these little icons or organize them by category, whichever you prefer. So we called, down at the bottom of the screen there was a whole bunch of icons we saw, that's called the dock. So we put our frequently used apps on the dock. Well, it kind of gauges what is frequently used to us and puts it there for us. So it kind of separates those things. When an app is open, you see a little dot underneath it to let you know that there's a window of that thing open. And you can click on the dock to switch apps. If you want to remove something off the dock, you just kind of drag it off towards the desktop and it'll automatically remove it for you. This is the heads-up program switcher, which we have, in Windows. Hold down Command and tap Tab, and you'll get to look between all the open windows and skip directly to one. You just keep hitting Tab and it will go to the next icon over. So the launch pad is similar to the home screen on your iOS device. You can see that there's a rocket icon that we'll mess with in the labs, and that will get you to the launch pad. So this is kind of a quick reference that you can put different things on.
Well, see, that one I can't make a pun about. It's a pun in itself.
Right? You can group apps together into little folders just like you would on an iPhone. So you can have one folder called Games and then put all the different games in it. It's a little easier to, instead of going to Finder and opening a program like we go to the Start menu and have to look through to find a program, you can just make yourself a shortcut through the Launchpad. If you drag an item over another item, it makes that folder come up and then you can change the name like we do on an iOS device. So Mission Control, we called this Virtual Desktop in Windows. They actually created it. It totally wasn't Microsoft. They did it first. But you can have more than one desktop that you can move between. And to do that, we would use this icon right here called Mission Control. And you can see it kind of shows different representations of desktops that we could use. You can change your preferences for Mission Control as well as to how you switch between windows and what your active window is going to be. You can do split screening in OS 10.11, so El Capitan and newer, which I guess now we actually have a newer, which is called Sierra. So they were doing animal names, and then they went to like places And then they went to El Capitan, and then they went to Sierra. They went back to places. I don't understand their naming.
It sounds kind of dry to me.
Okay, so here's the split view, occupying 50/50 of the screen. I know that's the thing that I do like crazy. Opening up gradebook on one side and opening up a browser on the other and having the split screen stuff. You can change what notifications you can get. You can even turn on Do Not Disturb like you do on your phone when you want everybody to leave you alone so you don't get any notifications in. That's kind of nice. There's some little menu extras. In Windows, we would see these at the bottom right by default, but you can change, your Wi-Fi settings, change your volume, turn on your search and things like that. To print in OS 10, you basically plug in a printer, turn it on, it will install the driver, or it will search the internet for the appropriate drivers, and apparently it's supposed to be pretty straightforward. When you look at a device in printers and scanners, you can go to that device and then open up the print queue to see what is being printed, and then set your default printer all within that one window. So AirPlay is a feature of iOS and OS 10. You can connect to an Apple TV and then send songs, videos, or playlists to your Apple TV.
That's pretty fly.
So it's called basically screen.
I have a week to catch up on, okay?
Oh, no, you don't, though. Managing local security. So we have a firewall built into OS 10 that's on by default. It's going to check for incoming connections between different apps, and you can create rules for your own personal firewall. So you can, if you get something that you don't want sending you any more notifications, you can just block so that it can't send you anything from different applications. And you can see they make it actually really easy between figuring out, I don't know what Microsoft Entourage is, but they've blocked all the incoming connections to it. Whatever it is, it sounds annoying. Then we have the gatekeeper. So the gatekeeper limits the online sources from which you can download programs. Now my mind immediately goes to, that would be great for somebody who had kids and they don't want them installing crap on their computer. But if you're someone who's not, or you're administering a computer to someone who's not necessarily a careful clicker, this would be a really good feature. Keeps you from downloading something that might possibly be malicious. So you can restrict from downloading from the App Store. The App Store in the iOS and the App Store in general is known to have very secure apps that have been very thoroughly tested. So you might say you can just get from the App Store because I trust that, and you can't download from any websites or anything like that. Address space layout randomization stores the operating system code in random memory locations instead of one right after the other. So this is kind of used to help prevent malware, because the malware doesn't exactly have the same target location to pick at every single time it wants to install something, which is kind of an interesting feature. All apps in the App Store have been digitally signed by Apple, saying that they don't contain any malicious code. If that code has been modified, then the operating system is going to pop up and tell you that something has happened to it. Everything in the App Store is sandboxed when you're running. That means it can't get to any other code that it's not authorized to talk to. So it's not reaching into another app's code and maybe doing something malicious with it. Apple determines what it can and cannot work with, which is one of the reasons the Apple stuff is so secure. File Vault. So when we talked about Windows, we had BitLocker. If we wanted to encrypt the whole hard drive, here we have File Vault. So this is whole disk encryption, and you can use, it can sync up with your iCloud key to recover the key to decrypt your data, which is a really nice feature. You're not depending on like a USB drive or something for that. It's sunk with the cloud. So as long as you can access your iCloud account, you can decrypt your files. That's pretty nice. So we talked about the swap file. The swap file for Apple is actually encrypted by default. There's no way to turn that off. So if you'll remember, the swap file is like using the hard disk like it's RAM when you run out of RAM. So that virtual memory has extra security involved in it. The keychain is credentials management, so saving your username, your passwords, and things like that for websites. But it's actually just stored on the local computer, and you can sync that to iCloud so that all of your Apple devices, if you have multiple laptops or maybe a laptop and a smartphone, everything is all sunk together. That's a really neat feature, and I really wish that that's something that Microsoft would get into. So this is what Keychain looks like, and you see it's just a big list, but every time you would go to log into a program or log into a website, it would be able to detect your username and password from that Keychain file.
So do you know why Microsoft doesn't sync like that?
Why?
No, I'm actually asking a legitimate question.
Oh, okay, I thought it was a joke.
I'm just checking.
I was waiting on a punchline. No, I don't know. I use LastPass for this. I think there's another thing called Dashlane, but it's not holding operating system stuff, it's just web stuff.
Well, it's a shame that they're not in sync.
And there it is. I knew there was a catch. There's categories of parental controls within the operating system. You can restrict what kind of apps can be used. So you might restrict within certain apps, you might restrict only certain websites can be used. Only certain people in Game Center or in email can be contacted. Or you might set time limits like preventing access during school nights. Let's say access gets cut off at 8 p.m. and they can't log in the computer anymore. 10 p.m. on the weekends, and you have control over that. A better way to do that's in the router. Anyway, if you just want to be bad. You have an administrator or a standard account, and there's different preferences set for those. You can automatically log in. You're bypassing the login page and having to type in your password that goes with your username. Of course, the problem with that is anybody who gets access to your laptop can then just open it and be logged into all of your stuff. So that's probably not the safest way to go, but if it's just you and the laptop stays at your house all the time, that might be something that you would want to do. To create a user account, we'll be doing this in the labs, open users and groups. You're going to have to, when you change a setting, there's a like a padlock. You'll click on that and unlock the window so you can change it and then lock it back before you exit. You hit the plus and then complete a little form, click create users, very easy. Same thing, you can delete user accounts in much the same way. Click the minus button to get rid of them. Common OS X problems. There's a help center. There's Apple support that's available if you do have problems. Within application, there's going to be help files as well. If you find something or you want to search online to be able to type in a specific error message or specific conditions that you're seeing. If you want to force quit an application, so we might use Alt F4 or do Control Alt Delete, go to Task Manager and exit out of a task. In OS X, you can open up here. This is the contextual menu that changes and tell it to quit. Or if you want to force quit, you would hold down Command Option Escape. And it would pull up that same dialog box where you could click on an application and then force it when it freezes up and you can't get through with it. You might have a failure to quit message when you're trying to shut down or log off or restart a PC that says you haven't been logged out because there was a certain application that you need to deal with first. We see those messages if we have like a Word document up and the computer tries to restart and it says, you still got this program open, what do you want to do with it? It's the same kind of thing. If you forget a password, okay, this is the single coolest thing. What do you do if you forget a password on a Windows machine? Does anybody know?
Just click that forget password thing.
Okay.
And then it doesn't respond.
You can do that, but you have to have already had a USB drive set up to be able to undo that.
Yeah.
Any other ideas? I'll be real impressed if somebody knows.
Say it.
Huh?
Say it.
What?
Say it.
You have to have some other piece of software loaded on something else, like a CD or a USB drive, that's going to search the Microsoft SAM database that stores all the usernames and passwords and clear out the password. So generally those cost money. There are some free ones online. I've got one in my office, but pay for it. But anytime you forget it, there's quite a lot of steps you have to go through. It's a very common thing that happens to lots of people, especially if they just have a local account on the computer. If they're on a domain, well then you can go change that. But one of the really cool things that I liked about OS 10, and I got to test this out, if you're an administrator, you can put in the OS 10 DVD and just from a menu say utilities reset password. There's also a key sequence you can hold down, I think it's Command-Shift-R or something, when the computer's booting up, and it gives you this whole utilities menu of all these things you can do, and you don't have to have special permissions to do it. So when you forget your password, it's not like the most terrible thing in the whole world. So if nobody can log in, you can use your Apple ID to be able to reset. Again, it's cool that all those things are synced together in this instance. So you can change your password or you can reset it. If you reset it, you have to rebuild your whole keychain. You're essentially shutting off your access to all the old passwords that your system had already saved, which could be pretty inconvenient. But if you change password, it's going to keep that information for you. So know the difference between those two. We have the disk utility where we can see what's taking up our hard drive and all the different space in between those. The capacity of our hard drive, how many disks we have. So we can see that this whole hard drive has other taking up space. It's better if it, you should have put a picture where it actually illustrated it. Network preferences, here we can change the IP address and things that we use, whether it's statically or dynamically assigned. You can use the command line terminal in OS 10 if you just feel like it. It's kind of like being in a Linux environment for a really good reason, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks. But you can, if you're really the kind of person that likes to type in commands, or you want to do multiple commands at the same time by running a bat file or something, or the equivalent for this, you would be able to do that there. If you want to look at the terminal, you can open up Finder and you'll see a terminal icon there. And it looks like that, right? The little prompt right there at the bottom. When you open up the terminal, this is what you'll see. I'll actually make you do a lab in the terminal just so we know that you did it. But you can see you've got the shell and all the different options that change there. Just like you would use command line in Windows and run a ping or a trace route or something. You can see all the different commands that are possible if you press the tab key twice. You'll see all the commands that you can possibly use in the terminal.